Grief is a strange thing. Sneaks up on you in the quietest moments, like when you're folding laundry and find a shirt that still smells like him. Or when you glance at the empty spot on the nightstand, where his watch used to rest. My husband's Rolex was more than just a timepiece. It was a symbol of everything we'd built together. A gift he'd saved for years to buy, and the one thing he wore every single day. After he passed, I kept it close. A small comfort in a world that suddenly felt so cold and unfamiliar. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the ache of losing him was the hardest thing I'd ever have to endure. But I was wrong. Because nothing prepares you for the moment you realize the people you trusted most, the ones who promised to stand by you, are capable of hurting you in ways you never imagined. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar and I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. But something in me said to pick up. The voice on the other end was gentle but urgent. "Ma'am, I think you need to know. Someone just tried to pawn a Rolex with your husband's name engraved on the back. They said it belonged to a family member. Is everything all right?" My heart stopped. In that instant, 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Who would do this? Why? And what else had I missed while drowning in my own sorrow? I had no idea that this call would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for myself. But the truth was about to come out, and nothing would ever be the same. When I first met Daniel, I was 24 and convinced I knew everything about love. He was older, steady, and had a way of making me feel like the only person in the room. Our first date was nothing special: a coffee shop, mismatched mugs, and a rainstorm that forced us to linger longer than planned. But I remember the way he listened, really listened, as if every word I said mattered. That was Daniel, patient, attentive, and quietly ambitious. We built a life together, brick by brick. Our apartment was small, but it was filled with laughter, late-night talks, and the kind of inside jokes that only come from years of shared history. Daniel worked hard, sometimes too hard, but he always made time for us. On our 10th anniversary, he surprised me with a dinner at the same coffee shop where we'd met. That night, he handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a Rolex leak. Classic, and engraved on the back with his initials and the date we married. "It's for you to keep safe," he said, "in case I ever forget what really matters." I laughed, but I knew what he meant. The watch was a promise, a reminder that time was precious and so was our love. But not everyone saw our happiness the same way. Daniel's family, his mother, his younger brother, and his sister-in-law were always polite, but there was a distance I could never quite bridge. His mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman who measured affection in obligations. She'd host elaborate family dinners, but her smiles never quite reached her eyes. She'd ask about my job, my health, but always with a hint of skepticism, as if waiting for me to slip up. Daniel's brother, Mark, was charming in a restless, unpredictable way. He'd breeze in and out of our lives, borrowing money, making promises, and leaving chaos in his wake. His wife, Tessa, was quieter, but I sensed a simmering resentment beneath her polite exterior. Despite the tension, Daniel tried to keep the peace. He'd smooth over arguments, make excuses for Mark's latest misadventure, and reassure me that his family meant well. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be part of their world, to feel like I belonged. But there was always a line I couldn't cross, an invisible barrier that kept me on the outside looking in. After Daniel's diagnosis, everything changed. The family rallied around him, at least on the surface. Evelyn brought casseroles and fussed over his medication. Mark promised to help with errands, though he rarely followed through. Tessa offered to sit with me at the hospital, but our conversations were stilted, filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. Through it all, Daniel remained my anchor. Even on his worst days, he'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "We're in this together." When he passed, the world felt hollow. The funeral was a blur of condolences and casseroles, of people saying all the right things while I felt like I was drowning. Evelyn took charge, organizing everything with military precision. Mark and Tessa hovered on the periphery, offering help I didn't know how to accept. I tried to be gracious, to let them in, but grief made me brittle. I clung to the few things that still felt like Daniel, his favorite mug, his old flannel shirt, and the Rolex he'd entrusted to me. That watch became my talisman. I kept it in a small box on my nightstand, taking it out sometimes just to run my fingers over the engraving. It was a piece of him, a reminder that our time together had mattered. I never imagined that something so precious could become the center of a storm I never saw coming. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed the warning signs, the lingering glances, the whispered conversations, the way Mark's eyes lit up when he saw the Rolex on my dresser. But I was too lost in my own grief to see what was brewing just beneath the surface. In the weeks after Daniel's funeral, my home became a revolving door. Evelyn insisted on coming by every other day, always with a new casserole or a stack of paperwork she claimed needed my attention. At first, I told myself she was just trying to help, that maybe this was her way of coping. But it didn't take long for her visits to feel less like support and more like surveillance. She'd wander from room to room, straightening picture frames, opening drawers, commenting on the dust or the way I'd arranged Daniel's things. Once I caught her in our bedroom, standing by my nightstand, her hand hovering over the box that held the Rolex. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite name. Mark and Tessa were no better. Mark would show up unannounced, always with some excusable he needed help with, a tool he wanted to borrow, a story about how hard things had been for him lately. He'd linger in Daniel's study, running his fingers over the books and trinkets, asking casual questions about what I planned to do with all this stuff. Tessa, meanwhile, would sit at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, barely making eye contact. But every so often, I'd catch her glancing at the Rolex when I wore it, her gaze lingering just a moment too long. It was the little things that started to wear me down. I'd find drawers left open, items moved from their usual places, and once, the box with the Rolex was slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd closed it. I tried to brush it off as my own forgetfulness. Grief does strange things to your memory, after all. But the unease grew, a low hum in the back of my mind that wouldn't go away. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Mark and Evelyn in the hallway. Their voices were low, but I caught snippets. She doesn't even wear it. It's just sitting there. He would have wanted us to have something nice. My stomach twisted. I wanted to confront them, to demand to know what they should. We're talking about, but I froze. Instead, I retreated to my bedroom, clutching the Rolex to my chest. Suddenly aware of how alone I truly was, the tension seeped into every interaction. Evelyn began making pointed comments about how I was holding onto the past and how some things are better shared among family. Mark joked about how the Rolex would look better on his wrist than gathering dust in a box. Even Tessa, usually so quiet, chimed in one evening saying, "It's just a watch, isn't it? Maybe it's time to let go." I started locking my bedroom door at night, something I'd never done before. I hid the Rolex in different places, never quite trusting that it was safe. Sleep became elusive, my mind racing with worry and suspicion. I stopped inviting them over, making excuses about needing time alone, but they always found reasons to drop by. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where I was constantly on guard, waiting for the next intrusion. Asterisk, the final straw came when I noticed a small scratch on the back of the Rolex one that hadn't been there before. My heart pounded as I turned the watch over in my hands, tracing the new mark with my thumb. Had someone tried to take it? Had they handled it when I wasn't looking? The thought made me sick. I realized then that my grief had blinded me to the reality of my situation. I was surrounded by people who saw my pain not as something to be respected, but as an opportunity. I wanted to believe the best in them, to think that family would never cross such a line. But the evidence was mounting and my trust was wearing. Then I could feel something coming, a confrontation I wasn't ready for. I just didn't know how soon it would arrive, or how much it would cost me. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, drizzly day that always made the house feel colder than it was. I'd woken up restless, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. I went through my usual routine: coffee, a quick shower, a moment at Daniel's photo on the mantel. But when I reached for the small box on my nightstand, the one That had become my ritual to open each morning. My heart stopped. The box was there, but it was empty. For a moment I just stared, willing the watch to appear. I tore through the drawers, checked under the bed, even retraced my steps from the day before. Nothing. The Rolex was gone. My hands shook as I searched, panic rising in my chest. To convince myself I'd misplaced it, that maybe in my exhaustion I'd put it somewhere else. But deep down, I knew. I knew because I'd been so careful, because I'd started hiding it in different places, because I'd felt the eyes on it every time my in-laws visited. I called Evelyn first, my voice trembling. "Have you seen Daniel's watch? The Rolex? It's missing." There was a pause, just long enough to make my skin crawl, before she replied, "Oh, honey, are you sure you didn't just misplace it? You've been so forgetful lately. Grief does strange things to the mind." Her tone was syrupy, but I could hear the edge beneath it. I tried Mark next. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed. "What's up?" "I'm busy," I forced myself to stay calm. "The Rolex is gone. Did you take it? Or see anyone else with it?" He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Why would I want that old thing? Maybe you finally lost it, huh?" I could almost picture the smirk on his face. "Tessa?" Texted back hours later, a single line, "Sorry, haven't seen it. Maybe check the laundry." The message stung, not just for its dismissiveness, but for the way it reduced my pain to a careless afterthought. I felt like I was losing my mind. I searched the house again. Every drawer, every closet, every pocket of every coat. I even checked the trash, desperate for any sign. But the watch was gone, and with it, the last piece of Daniel I could hold in my hands that evening. I invited them all over, determined to confront them face to face. I sat at the kitchen table, the empty box. In front of me, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. "One of you took it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel's watch. It's gone. I want it back." Evelyn's eyes widened in mock surprise. "Are you accusing your own family? After everything we've done for you?" Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. "You're losing it, you know that? Maybe you should get some help." Tessa wouldn't even look at me, her gaze fixed on her phone. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with denial and something darker. I tried to hold my ground, to make them see how much this hurt, but every word I spoke was twisted, dismissed, turned back on me. "You're not yourself," Evelyn said, her voice cold now. "Maybe you should let us handle things for a while. You're clearly not coping." I wanted to scream, to shake them, to make them understand that this wasn't about a watch. It was about trust, about respect, about the last piece of the man I loved. But they closed ranks, united in their denial, leaving me isolated and doubting my own reality. After they left, I sat alone in the dark, the empty box still in front of me. I felt hollowed out, betrayed not just by their actions, but by their refusal to even acknowledge my pain. I wondered if I'd ever get the watch back, or if I'd ever be able to look at my family the same way again. But just as I was about to give up hope, my phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost apologetic. "Ma'am, I think you need to know. Someone just tried to pawn a Rolex with your husband's name engraved on the back. They said it belonged to a family member. Is everything all right?" In that moment, everything shifted. So the truth was out there, waiting for me to claim it. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The hours after that call felt like a fever dream, surreal, jagged, and impossible to escape. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, replaying the pawnshop owner's words over and over. My mind raced with questions, but the one that echoed loudest was the simplest. How could they? How could the people who stood beside me at Daniel's funeral, who hugged me and whispered that we were family, turn around and do something so cruel? I called the pawn shop back, my voice barely steady. The owner, Mr. Patel, was kind and patient, explaining that a man and a woman he thought they were siblings had come in with the Rolex that morning. He'd grown suspicious when he saw the engraving and asked a few questions. Their answers didn't add up, so he held on to the watch. and said he needed to verify its provenance. "I just had a feeling," he said gently. "I'm glad I called you." Relief and rage warred inside me. The watch was safe, at least for now, but the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. Mark and Tessa had tried to sell Daniel's watch. My hands shook as I texted them both, asking them to come over. I needed to see their faces to hear their excuses. Evelyn arrived first, her expression tight and unreadable. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice clipped. I told her about the pawn shop, about the call, about the engraving. She didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed, as if I were a child making a fuss over nothing. "It's just a watch, dear. Daniel would have wanted us to use it for something meaningful. You're letting your grief cloud your judgment." Mark and Tessa showed up together, arms folded, eyes hard. Mark didn't even bother to deny it. "We needed the money," he said, shrugging. "You have everything. The house, the car, all his stuff. What's one watch? It's not like you wear it." Tessa nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We thought you'd understand. We're family. We deserve something too." There. Words hit me like a slap. I tried to explain what the watch meant to me, how it was the last piece of Daniel I could hold on to. But they rolled their eyes, dismissing my pain as selfishness. "You're not the only one who lost him, Mark." Snapped. "We're hurting too. But you act like you're the only one who matters." Asterisk. The room felt colder with every word. I looked at Evelyn, hoping for some sign of understanding, but she just shook her head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Let it go." I realized then that there was no apology coming, no moment of remorse or reconciliation. The rift between us had become a chasm, and I was standing on one side, clutching the memory of my husband, while they stood on the other, arms full of entitlement and resentment. After they left, I sat in the silence, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. I thought about all the times I'd tried to fit in, to be the daughter-in-law they wanted, to keep the peace for Daniel's sake. I thought about the warmth of my marriage, the laughter and love that had filled our home, and how quickly it had all been replaced by suspicion and loss. But beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir, a quiet, stubborn resolve. I couldn't change what they'd done, but I could decide what happened next. I could choose to protect what mattered, to honor Daniel's memory in my own way, even if it meant standing alone. The pain was still raw, but for the first time since Daniel's death, I felt a flicker of strength. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was done letting their entitlement define my grief. The next step was mine to take, and I knew I wouldn't back down. The next morning, I woke to a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from too many tears and not enough sleep. I moved through the house in a daze, every room echoing with memories of Daniel and the life we'd built together. The silence was heavy, but it was a relief compared to the voices of my in-laws, their accusations and justifications still ringing in my ears. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when my phone rang again. It was Mr. Patel from the pawn shop. His voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "I just wanted to let you know, ma'am, the watch is still here. I won't release it to anyone but you. I'm sorry for what you're going through." His kindness nearly undid me. I thanked him, promising to come by that afternoon. Asterisk. As I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. My face looked older, drawn tight with grief and exhaustion. But beneath the sadness, I saw something else, a flicker of determination. I'd spent weeks letting my in-laws walk all over me, doubting my own instincts, shrinking myself to keep the peace. But now, with the truth laid bare, I had a choice to make. Part of me wanted to let it go, to avoid another confrontation, simply collect the watch and lock it away forever. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice in my head, urging me to move on and let bygones be bygones. But another part of me, the part that remembered Daniel's steady hand in mine, refused to be silenced. This wasn't just about a watch. It was about respect, about boundaries, about refusing to let my grief be trampled by their entitlement. I paced the kitchen, replaying every conversation, every dismissive glance, every time I'd been made to feel small. I thought about what Daniel would have wanted, how he'd always encouraged me to stand up for myself, to speak my truth, even when it was hard. I realized I couldn't let this go, not without saying what needed to be said. The decision settled over me like a second skin. I would confront them, not for revenge, but for closure. I needed them to know that I saw what they'd done, that I wouldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I needed to reclaim my voice, to draw a line in the sand, even if it meant losing what little family I had left. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave for the pawn shop, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and resolve. I didn't know how they would react or what would happen to our already fractured relationship, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being silent. The next chapter was mine too, right? And I was ready to face whatever came next. I drove to the pawn shop with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The city blurred past my window, but my mind was sharp, focused on what I needed to do. When I walked into Mr. Patel's shop, he greeted me with a kind smile and handed me Daniel's Rolex, carefully wrapped in a velvet cloth. I cradled it in my hands, feeling the weight of a divim settle back into my life. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the relief and sorrow wash over me in equal measure. But I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed to face my in-laws, to look them in the eye and say the words I'd been swallowing for too long. I texted Evelyn, Mark, and Tessa, asking them to meet me at my house that evening. My message was brief, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in my tone. When they arrived, the air was thick with tension. Mark slouched in the doorway, Tessa hovered behind him, and Evelyn sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, her lips pressed into a thin line. I placed the Rolex on the coffee table between us, the engraving glinting in the lamplight. "I got a call from the pawn shop," I began, my voice steady. It told me exactly who brought the watch in. "I have the security footage, and I have the watch back. I know what you did." For a moment, no one spoke. Mark's bravado faltered, his eyes darting away. Tessa's face flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. Evelyn's expression hardened, but I saw the flicker of shame in her eyes. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice trembling but strong. "I let you into my home, into my grief, and you took advantage of that. This watch isn't just a thing, it's a piece of Daniel, a piece of my heart. You didn't just steal from me, you betrayed everything he stood for." Evelyn tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "No, I'm done listening to excuses. I'm done letting you make me feel small. I deserve better than this." And so did Daniel. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was different this time. I felt taller, stronger, as if I'd finally stepped out from under their shadow. Mark mumbled an apology, barely audible. Tessa wiped away a tear, but said nothing. Evelyn stood, gathering her purse, her face unreadable. "If that's how you feel, then maybe it's best we keep our distance," she said coldly. I nodded, feeling both the sting and the relief of her words. "Maybe it is." As they left, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the Rolex warm in my palm. I knew things would never be the same. The family I'd tried so hard to hold on to was gone, or at least changed beyond recognition. But in their place, I found something I hadn't expected, my own voice. It's clear and unwavering. Standing up for myself came at a cost of bittersweet ache for what was lost. But as I looked down at Daniel's watch, I knew I'd honored him and myself in the only way that truly mattered. In the quiet that followed, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, Daniel's Rolex resting in my palm, the weight of it both grounding and comforting. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the confrontation, the painful realization that sometimes the people you call family are the ones who hurt you most. I'd spent so long trying to keep the peace, to be the good daughter-in-law, to hold on to a version of family that never truly existed. But in losing that illusion, I found something far more valuable. My own self-respect. Trust, I've learned, is a fragile thing. It's built slowly over years of shared moments and quiet promises, but it can be shattered in an instant. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that keeping quiet was the price of belonging. Now I know that real love, the kind Daniel gave me, is about respect, honesty, and the courage. to stand up for yourself, okay, even when your voice shakes. If you're watching this and you've ever felt small, dismissed, or betrayed by those you thought you could trust, I want you to know you're not alone. Your pain is real and your boundaries matter. It's okay to demand respect. It's okay to walk away from people who refuse to honor your worth. Healing isn't easy, and standing up for yourself can feel lonely, but it's also the first step toward reclaiming your life. As I close this chapter, I carry Daniel's memory with me, not just in a watch, but in the strength he helped me find. I hope my story reminds you that you are worthy of love, respect, and peace. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, remember, your voice matters. Use it.